Okay, I mean, I guess we're ready to go. So, um, I want to welcome everyone who to my talk this afternoon. My name is Dave Roberts, and before we begin, I will give you just some brief background, just so you understand who I am and how I got here. A lot of this will come out in the talk, in my story, in my background that got me to this point. But just let me give you some brief biographical information. Um, Prior to embarking on a path of service to others who have experienced catastrophic loss, I was for 27 years an addiction professional and a clinical supervisor for the state of New York at a local inpatient treatment facility called the McPike Addictions Treatment Center in Utica, New York. I retired in July of 2012 and retired to a different set of activities, a set of activities that I became very passionate about. Um, the first, the first activity was becoming an adjunct professor of psychology and psychology child life at Utica University in Utica, New York. And I'd actually started working there part time in 2003, but once I retired, more opportunities to teach came up. And one of the courses that I teach regularly is Death, Dying, and Bereavement, and is one of the most fulfilling courses that I've taught. From there, I've become an author. I've blogged on grief and addiction and spirituality for a variety of inpatient or for a variety of internet sites. Um, I have done workshop presentations both nationally and locally on grief and loss. So essentially, I've been busier since I've been retired than I ever was working. But what I do, I'm passionate about. I love sharing what I have learned, what I've discovered, in the hope that it will resonate and inspire others to find their own path after life-altering challenges. Before we get going, I want to do some acknowledgments. I want to I'm honored to be a part of this platform. There have been so many great inspirational speakers and workshop presenters this weekend. I'm to try to address all of them. And obviously, if there's questions or comments, I'll take them at any time. And I may just stop in between segments to address those comments to make sure everybody gets heard. And in this way, we can create our own community um, of grief and transformation. Okay. Um, you can go ahead, and if you want to put my slides up, that'd be cool. Whoever, Josh or Nate. And also, I gotta thank Josh and Nathan for their technological expertise, for keeping me straight, for my presentations, and for just providing a tremendous amount of support and guidance prior to this weekend. And it's just been fabulous. And you guys have done a great job. And I'll tell you, I would hire you guys anytime, any place to do the same thing. You guys are fabulous. Um, okay. Um, Title of my presentation is Wallowing Through the Muck, Discovering Joy and Meaning After Catastrophic Loss. And before we get into the actual progression of self-discovery that I embarked upon, I do need to share some background. And I do need to share my story in terms of how I've gotten here. Because I think for me and other individuals who have embarked on a path of service to those who have experienced life-altering loss, we didn't come into this path through, most of us, through professional choice. It certainly wasn't my professional choice to embark on the study of death and dying and to provide service in that area to people who needed it. It was certainly through personal circumstance. And so with that, I do want to share my story with you. And I appreciate those who are listening to my story and will honor my story, because telling our stories in communities that support them is an important step for all of us to begin to wrap our heads around the circumstances of our loss, to wrap our head around the reality of our loss, to come to some type of acceptance that the world that we live in is going to be different without the physical presence of our loved ones, and also for helping us re-engage in life with purpose and meaning. And I hope that the path and the teachings that I've discovered and I will share with you will resonate. For me, it's truly been a path of self-discovery. I've embraced perspectives that I never thought were possible after catastrophic loss. Before I put the first slide up, and this will be of the event that really changed the way I looked at life and death and life after death, I want to give you just a brief lossography history. I'm no stranger to loss. I have danced with grief since I've been 5 years old. The first loss that I experienced was actually a symbolic loss, one that was not initially related to death. My father, Austin Roberts, left my mother, Sadie, and me when I was 5 years old, leaving my mother to raise me as an only child. I never saw him again, never heard from him again, but found out at the age of 14, that he died on July 22nd, 1966, in a car accident in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Since that time, I've experienced a variety of different losses. My mother, my maternal grandmother. I've lost a dear friend and mentor and supervisor to cancer. I've experienced pet loss on numerous occasions. So I've experienced loss on a variety of different levels. But there was one event that rocked the foundation of the world that I once thought was safe, that rocked and shattered the assumptions that I had about how life and death were supposed to work, my beliefs about how the world operated, and it put me in a situation where I needed to reevaluate everything. This is my daughter, Janine Marie Roberts. And this is one of my favorite pictures of her. This was taken, when she was about 15. And I think we were on our way to see one of my son Matthew's baseball games. And Janine was always one that would support her brothers. And particularly, she really loved to watch Matt play baseball. In September of 2001, my daughter, Janine, who was 17 at the time, called me at home, and she said, "Dad, we need to talk to you." Now, her significant other was the second part of the we, and I'm not going to mention her significant other's name just out of respect for privacy for him. He's a very private individual. So I always told him that that I would always respect his privacy. And so I want to continue to honor that request of his here. So about 20 minutes later, they arrived. And Janine, who was about as subtle as a trumpet solo, came in, closed the kitchen door. Before she even sat down, she looked at me and she said, "Dad, I'm pregnant." No hello, no how do you do? Just, "Dad, I'm pregnant." Now, surprisingly, I didn't get upset or panic. And I think a lot of fathers, many fathers who would have heard that from their daughter might have been a little bit upset, might have been concerned. But the only thing I was concerned about is I wanted to make sure that they had a sound plan to take care of their child. Her significant other, who was 19 at the time, had a very highly developed sense of responsibility, and I knew he was going to take care of her. I liked him immensely. He was good to my daughter, and I knew he was going to take care of her. It turns out that they had a plan. Now, my daughter Janine was 18 when she gave birth to her beautiful daughter and my only granddaughter, Brianna Lee, on May 2nd, 2002, which means on Monday that Janine's daughter and my granddaughter, Brianna, is going to be 20 years old. During the early part of Janine's pregnancy, she injured her right foot in a very freak accident. Her foot became progressively swollen to the point where she had difficulty walking or putting on a shoe. Now, her obstetrician and podiatrist, and me and my wife, Sherry, assumed that the swelling in her foot was a normal complication from pregnancy and that it would eventually go down. But in April of 2002, her podiatrist became increasingly concerned and wanted to do an MRI of her foot. And Janine adamantly refused because she did not want to jeopardize the health of her child. So she said, my child is born, we'll do the MRI. So immediately after Brianna's birth, they did an MRI. They found an undefined 8-centimeter mass at the bottom of her foot. A biopsy was done a week later, and it was highly suggestive for cancer. So we made an appointment in late May. In fact, it was May 26th that we made the appointment. And Janine's oncologist suspected that she had a rare type of cancer called alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma that affects the connective muscle tissue of the body. Her oncologist also suspected that the cancer had spread. So she made a referral to a couple of different pediatric oncology hospitals, and Dana-Farber in Boston answered the call. They gave us an appointment for a consult on June 2nd, 2002. We took all the test results, talked to the oncologist, and it was me, Janine, her significant other, and my wife Sherry were at the consult. In about 5 minutes, the oncologist at Dana-Farber, who was extremely bright, extremely competent, pretty much laid out that she had a stage 4 tumor with distant metastasis, which her cancer spread to her bones, her lymph nodes, and everywhere. She basically told Janine and me and Cher and her significant other that her cancer was incurable and that the only hope that we had was for aggressive chemotherapy to put her cancer in remission until a cure could be found. Now, at that point, what I had heard loud and clear, and judging from the tears that were coming down Janine's face, what we both heard was that, in all likelihood, she was going to die, unless there was a miracle on the horizon. Now, I need to set up somewhat of a timeline for you with this, just a brief one, and just to show you pretty much how life can turn on a dime. May 2nd, my granddaughter, Brianna, was born. On May 19th, I was officially notified by the University at Albany that I'd successfully completed the requirements for my Master in Social Work degree. On May 26th, Janine was diagnosed with alveolar rhabdomyosarcoma, and on June 2nd, we essentially got a prognosis that indicated to me that I was going to be walking a path that I never, ever envisioned walking on. So I went from the joy of being a grandparent to the joy of being a new master's in social work candidate, getting my degree, to a parent who was involved with a child who was going to be in a battle for her life. So in the course of a 5-minute consultation, my life changed. Now, between June and October of 2002, Janine had 6 rounds of aggressive chemotherapy, but this only put her cancer in 80% remission. And with cancer, it's got to be 100% or nothing. Eventually, her cancer spread again. We were given a prognosis in early January of 1 to 3 months. Janine opted in February, I believe it was February 19th of 2003, to undergo no further chemotherapy treatment, radiation treatment, and she agreed to hospice services. Janine transitioned on March 1st, 2003, at home at the age of 18 with hospice providing support, approximately 10 months after her initial diagnosis. Prior to Janine's transition, her significant other, their cat, Janine, moved into our small one-level ranch house with me, my wife, and her 2 brothers, and my 2 sons, Dan and Matt. So the joke in the neighborhood at that time was, how many animals and how many humans could you get in a small one-level ranch? Well, we were able to get quite a few. We were able to make it work, and and Stephen, her significant other, and Brianna stayed with us for 4 years following Janine's death, her transition. Okay, so that's the story. That's kind of the story with the background story, and this again led me on a journey of self-discovery that had a lot of phases to it, a lot of transition to it, but it wasn't, the self-discovery piece. There needed to be some other things that I needed to experience before I could embark on self-discovery. Okay. Now, I'm going to put this slide up here because Brianna, when she knows I'm doing one of these presentations, she always said, "Grandpa, make me famous." So I'm going to make her famous. This is a side-by-side photo of Janine. This is a painting of Janine that one of my students at the Pratt School of Art did for me as a gift. I teach also a general psychology course at the Pratt School of Art. And this young man had come up to me and knew the story of Janine. And I'm very open with this, the story of Janine and her transition in my death, dying, and bereavement class and in my general psychology class, because we do talk about grief and loss, and we talk about other issues that are related to grief and loss in that class. So they know very much they know my history. They know, they know about Janine. So Brianna put this picture together of Janine and her. This was a painting, again, that one of my students had done. He did it in pencil. Just a striking resemblance to the picture. And I put Brianna side by side, and I get many comments in terms of the striking similarities, not only physically, but interestingly, if you talk to my granddaughter, Brianna, it would be almost like you were talking to her mother and my daughter, Janine. They're very similar in personality, very similar in temperament. And there have been studies that have shown that temperament of children is inherited through their parents. And I think that's a part of it. But considering that Janine only had the opportunity to bond with Brianna for about 10 months, and a good portion of those 10 months were where she was really too sick to take care of her on her own, considering that they didn't have a lot of time to bond and the striking similarities. We could look at it as inherited, disposition, or we could look at it as something that that science or genetics can't explain. And it's just one of those life's great mysteries that that makes life so entertaining and really so rich. Okay. Now, at the time of Janine's illness and transition, as I mentioned, I was employed as an addiction counselor and clinical supervisor at the McPike Addiction Treatment Center. In my then 17 years as a therapist, I had always valued the work that I did with clients who had trauma that were directly related to addiction or that contributed to addiction. But my work experience, my educational background didn't even remotely prepare me to deal with such an unnatural event for any parent. It's unnatural for a parent to bury their child. So at 47 years of age, and usually at 47 years of age, a lot of individuals are going through midlife. And at 47 years of age, it wasn't so much about midlife. It was about me having to look at my beliefs, priorities, and assumptions about the world. And in addition to dealing with the extreme fatigue of grief, the lack of sleep, the disorientation, the confusion, a disconnect from a world that had suddenly become terrifying to me. In the middle of all of this, I had to look at everything that I stood for and decide which beliefs were going to stay, which beliefs needed to be modified, and which beliefs and assumptions no longer served me. And it was probably one of the most arduous tasks I ever undertook. The cognitive fatigue, the mental fatigue from going through all of that, compounded by the physical fatigue, was really overwhelming at times for me in early grief. What I needed to do kind of mirrored what, and if Claire Schwartz is out there somewhere, this is for you, Claire. What I needed to do for me mirrored what Neil Peart, the late brilliant drummer, and for me the best drummer of my generation, of the Canadian rock band Rush, needed to do after the catastrophic losses he experienced in 1997 and 1998. And during that time, his daughter Selena died in a one-car accident in Toronto, and his wife died 10 months later of stomach cancer, which he attributed, and I'm paraphrasing this, to the stress caused by her daughter's death and her just inability to fathom living in a world without the physical presence of her daughter. And this is what Peart said he needed to do after those losses. He said he had to determine the kind of world that he wanted to live in and the type of person he wanted to be. And for me, this was the task ahead of me. And I think for many of us who have experienced catastrophic loss, that is the task for us too. We have to determine what type of person do we want to be? What type of world do we want to live in? What type of world do we want to re-engage in? And also, if we ever want to re-engage in the world, that's also a decision that, a decision that we look at, an option that we look at. Okay. So, all right. I don't see any comments, so I'm just going to keep on moving. Okay. My process of self-discovery. Before I could get into the process of self-discovery, and before I get into this, before this happened, one of the things that I needed to do, and this goes with the theme of my talk, is I needed to wallow in the muck of despair and longing for a daughter I could no longer have as a physical presence in my world. I had to devoutly feel every negative emotion that occurred as a result of grief. I had to feel my pain. I had to feel my sadness. I had to feel my yearnings. If at that time, even in early grief, if it was only for me to learn that I could survive it. And I had to wallow in the muck of my grief. And I did for a good 2.5 years. And after that time, I decided that I had to wallow through the muck instead of in it. And that is when I committed to my own process of self-discovery to see what I could learn and who I could learn it from that would help me rebuild a world that was, at that, for me, hopelessly shattered after my daughter transitioned. Now, I didn't have a clear vision of how that was going to happen, but I knew it needed to happen. So before we get into that process, I want to just talk about a couple of things that for me was my own process of self-discovery. And for everybody, it could be different because we all don't grieve the same way. We all don't re-engage in life the same way. We're going to use different tools. And from my perspective, it all works. And being able to share those tools with each other, to me, creates a community of grief where all beliefs are welcome, all perspectives are welcome, where we can learn from each other and grow together and create a world that basically is our vision of heaven on earth. But my process of self-discovery was a progression, and it was highlighted by a series of transformational moments that I'll get into. The process of self-discovery has no endpoint. I am going to continue to grow and learn until I transition into a new existence. I was talking with Tony Lynch last night. We were talking about just how how we can build communities of grief. And one of the things I told him, and this is the attitude that I project, or the teaching that I tell my students. I said, within every student lies a great teacher, and within any great teacher lies a great student. And if we can recognize that there is a teacher and student with all of us, we can teach and learn from each other equally, and we can level the playing field in terms of in terms of status and everything else. That we can all learn from each other if we agree to that. I also tell my students, and my female students, I also tell them, I said, if your father gets upset with you because you've come home pregnant and he's really thinking that this is the worst thing that could possibly happen to him, I said, you have him call me. I'll tell you, I got one better for him, because I can tell him that the daughter whom I love and I still love very dearly became pregnant and did not live to see her child grow. And I said, guaranteed, once he hears my story, he will take a softer stance towards you. And I always put that offer out to any of my students or any young adults. I said, if your father thinks that is the worst thing that can happen, you have him call me and I'll do one better. Okay. Again, this is for Claire and all you Rush fans. This is when I embarked on my path to self-discovery. The Analog Kid is actually a song by Rush that was written by Neil Peart. It's off their album Subdivisions. For any of you Rush fans or anybody who are music trivia buffs, that's where you would find it. And this is a phrase from the Analog Kid. This is basically a story, I think, about a young man who was restless, bored, and just embarked on a journey of self-discovery. And this passage really resonated with me. Is that when I leave, I don't know what I'm hoping to find. And when I leave, I don't know what I'm leaving behind. And honestly, when I made that decision to wallow through the muck of my grief, I didn't know what I was hoping to find on my own journey. I didn't know what paths were going to open up. But unlike the Analog Kid, I knew what I was going to be leaving behind. The disempowerment and pain, longing, anger, and the disordered state of my mind, body, and soul would be welcome casualties on the road of self-discovery. How I would get there would be uncertain, And the truths I would discover along the way were also uncertain. But as I've discovered, simple intent and trust in God's plan or the universe's plan or your higher power's plan, however you conceptualize being connected to something greater than yourself, is a powerful facilitator of self-discovery. Simple intent and faith that the needs that you've stated implied in that intent or inherent in that intent are going to be met are key to embracing the path of self-discovery. For me, this was very key. Okay. I want to talk to you a little bit about the progression. The first stage of my progression of self-discovery was at around the 3-year mark. This is when I made the decision to re-engage in life and embark on a path of service to others in honor of and with my daughter, to those individuals who had experienced life-altering losses. But I made the decision to re-engage with the help of a very unlikely individual, a woman by the name of Sister Rose Troy. Now, Sister Rose Troy was a Jesuit nun who facilitated a bereaved parent support group, or co-facilitated it along with another parent who had experienced the death of a child. And my wife, Sherry, and I discovered her support group about 6 months after Janine transitioned. And one of the things that I struggled with mightily in the first 2.5 years of my grief was anger, and anger at God for taking my daughter away from me and putting me in a position where I had to navigate a world that I no longer recognized. And I held on to that anger for a long time. It also got to the point where my anger prevented me from cutting myself off from meaningful support. At the 2.5-year mark, I also said, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't want to be a parent who's lost a child anymore. I don't want to wallow in the muck of pain. I just want my life back. And so I cut myself off from all support, threw myself into school and to other activities, and shortly became miserable. After that, became miserable because I realized that what I was cutting myself off from was what I needed the most. So I called Sister Rose and I made an appointment with her, and I told her, I said, I'd like to see a couple of sessions individually if I could. And I told her immediately, with tears streaming down my face, that I was angry at God for taking my daughter from me. And she looked at me and she goes, what if you look at it from a different perspective? What if God was just as angry as you, that as hurt as you, because your daughter is no longer a part of your life? And really, when she said that, I froze in my tracks, and I had to really look at that piece. And so I went home and I reflected on it for a bit, and I said, maybe he is as upset as I am over my daughter's physical absence, because at that time I was getting nudges or the events were occurring that I believed were actual signs of my daughter's eternal presence. Although at the time I was getting them, I wasn't quite sure how to integrate them into grief. I was a guy who was very much science-based. I believed that the only behavior that we could quantify was that we could see. I didn't believe in spirits, ghosts. I didn't believe in any potential of our spirit to survive in another level of consciousness after our physical transition. I didn't believe in any of that. But I started pondering at least the initial possibility, because what I thought was happening initially after in those first 2.5 years, I was getting some type of signs of my daughter's presence, whether it was a song that I heard on the radio that we both enjoyed, or a butterfly, but I wasn't sure how to integrate that into grief, and I wasn't sure where that fit within my own existing belief system. Okay. Now, We're going to fast forward to 7 years after Janine's transition. In August of 2010, through pure serendipity, I met Reverend Patty Farina, who at that time was an interfaith minister living in Long Island. Currently, she's living now in Lancaster, South Carolina. How we met is that she was trying to register for a conference that we had sponsored in 2010, that a local group that I was involved in was sponsoring. And I had been part of the conference committee, and I was a point person for registration. Registration was online. So Patty had selected her groups, selected her activities, had her credit card information, was about ready to pay, and her screen went blank. And as we look at it now, we believe it was divine intervention, because had her screen had not gone blank, had she had not been able to register, we might have never met. So she ended up calling the number that was listed in the event of problems with registration, and it was my number. I picked up the phone. We talked for about 45 minutes. I asked her with very gentle care if she had ever lost a child, and she said no, but that she had been the volunteer coordinator for the Angel of Hope statue in Long Island. And the Angel of Hope is a statue that is erected that is in honor of parents who have lost their children. And she said she had worked with many individuals who had lost children and had become particularly close with 2 who had died. So I vowed that when I saw her at the conference, I would give her a great big hug. And so that happened. And she whispered in my ear, she had asked me, she goes, "Do you believe in signs?" She had asked me during the phone call. And I said, not really. I said, but I think I might have gotten a sign. One that was really powerful was I saw a double rainbow on Father's Day, 2009. And, my wife, Sherry, called me to draw my attention to it. It got my attention because it hadn't rained. So she whispered in my ear, she hugged me. She goes, "I think your daughter sent me a rainbow." And at that time, I took it with a grain of salt, because I was just beat after the conference. But moving ahead, she had later told me that on September 3rd, and I think it was her and her husband had taken a weekend trip to New Jersey. They were driving on Route 17, and they saw this just amazing rainbow that just stretched the entire length of Route 17. It was so magnificent that they had to video it. So she said, as she got out of the car, she had heard a voice in her head saying, "I need you to talk to my father." And she said, "I'd be happy to talk to your father, but who is it?" She goes, "You talked to him last week about the conference." So Patty herself has a very strong connection to spirit. And so what had happened is that in November of 2010, there was an event in Long Island that I had been interested in attending. I was pondering attending it. And she had said to me, she goes, "Look, if you ever want to come down to Long Island, I will show you my Long Island. If you want to come down for the activity or for the event, you can stay with me and my husband. You can spend the weekend. We'll go to the activity and we'll get to know each other a little better." I said, "Okay, fine." I said, "As long as your husband is okay with it, I'm good with it." So I opted to go to the event. Now, this event occurred November 11th, 2010. If you take a look at the numerology, 1111 is been known to be the universal symbol for awakening. And boy, did I have an awakening. After the weekend with Patty, how I viewed life, how I viewed death and life after death became very different. I became convinced that our spirits do survive in another level of consciousness, and that we can connect with the essence of our loved ones anytime that we choose. That weekend and the subsequent marathon conversations that followed with Patty and I set the stage for how I incorporate spiritual perspectives more regularly with my psychology, based beliefs and scientific based beliefs. And I was able to see, I began incorporating spiritual perspectives with traditional evidence based practices with my addiction clients. And I began to see immediate benefits. And, and we still have these marathon conversations today, though not as frequently, but we do. And eventually, after much prodding on my part, Patty agreed to write a book with me, and we talk about the full breadth of our experience. We give a sampling of the marathon conversations that we had, how they lay the framework for the integration of psychology and spirituality, and also a message for the younger generation, many of whom are very intuitive, who are very kinesthetic, very multisensory. And we put all of that into our recently published book. We published it on March 1st, 2021. And we did that because March 1st was the day that my daughter transitioned. The book is called When the Psychology Professor Met the Minister. It's on Amazon, and at the end of the presentation, there'll be a slide to show you how you can grab a copy of the book. We're very excited about the work that we put forward. We're very excited about the reviews we've gotten so far, primarily because for those who have read it, it's made a difference, and it has at least broadened their perspective and given them food for thought. And in our book, we basically talk about the importance of transcending loss through belief expansion. It's adding beliefs in addition to your core beliefs and not instead of. That we can embrace new perspectives or parts of new perspectives without compromising our basic beliefs about the world. And one of the things that I have discovered is that transcending the challenges from loss, is because of our ability to be able to expand our belief system, to be able to do that. So that was kind of the second piece, the second very instrumental event in my process of self-discovery. I began to discover now that psychology and spirituality could coexist. And because of that, I became more interested in spiritual perspectives. I would talk with Patty about, let's say, Native American teachings of animals and nature. And then automatically my scientific mind and scientific curiosity or intellectual curiosity would research this and say, okay, how does it fit with what I'm doing in my own life? How can this fit in the work I'm doing with others? So every perspective we talked about got me to expand my belief system even more. And Patty was the catalyst for that. And Patty was also the catalyst for me embracing other spiritual teachers who helped me, who helped me with other parts of my life, particularly ancestral healing parts of my life with my mother and father that I never thought would have been possible. But it all started with Patty. It all started with my work after in my commitment to grow and to help others as a result of that growth. After following the transition of my daughter Janine, and just everything kind of opened up from there. So once it opened up myself up to a different perspective, and I was willing to embrace anything that came forward from that. The whole world opened up for me at that point. And also, what I need to say is, even though the experience I had with Patty helped me find peace after my daughter's transition, and helped me accept that I am living in a world without the physical presence of my daughter, and in spite of that, still made the commitment to re-engage and help others. Does that mean that I'm over my grief? We grieve to an extent. Many of us grieve to an extent for the rest of our lives. I just realized now that that's going to be part of my general life experience. I understand it. And 19 plus years later, I've learned how to manage it, and I've learned basically to learn and to learn from the bad moments as well as the good moments that I've experienced. Okay. There was another piece with this. Okay. Shortly after the experience in 2011, Oops, I'm going to go back to that. I discovered that eternity could wait. Now, one of the things that I had always pondered after my daughter's death, I never pondered the thought of suicide. Um, but I did say, if God decided that I had met my goals on earth, that I had completed my mission, and He wanted me to start eternity earlier with my daughter, I would not have gotten in the way. And I had felt that way because the pain of her physical absence was so raw in early grief that there were days that I just couldn't tolerate it. I had all I could do to survive it. But when faced with my own mortality, and particularly after um, the conversations I was beginning to have with Patty, I discovered that eternity could wait. In fact, I even asked for it. So actually, I think it was in March of 2011. Um, my doctor wanted to do a biopsy procedure to rule out cancer in a certain part of my body. Now he said there wasn't any immediate urgency to get it done, but he wanted to do it anyway. He also thought that the results would be favorable based on his examination, but he wanted to do something just to be sure. But given my recent past and the fact that my safety net was shattered after my daughter's transition, I knew there weren't any guarantees, and I was somewhat worried. And the other reason I was worried is if I did have cancer, I did not want my family to have to go through another cancer challenge with a family member. And I really wanted to avoid that. The biopsy, ironically, was scheduled for May 26, 2011, which was the 9-year anniversary of Janine's biopsy results being confirmed. And I was scheduled to get the results on June 2nd, 2011. June 2nd, 2011 was 9 years to the day that we got the terrible news of her prognosis of Dana-Farber. So in retrospect, I looked at that, and everything with the dates, the numerology, it was all in alignment. Shortly after my biopsy was scheduled, I took a leisurely walk. And I remembered stating my intent to God. When I pray, I have conversations. That's how I pray. That's my form of prayer. So I looked up at the sky. I looked up at the sky, figuring that's where he was going to where he was. And I said, "Look, whatever your will is, I will follow it. But you need to know I'm not ready for you yet, because I'm enjoying my newfound relationship with Janine. I'm starting to understand that I can maintain this bond and connect with her essence, connect with her at any time, and the benefits it's reaped. I want this to play out longer. I want to be able to impart what I've learned onto others. I want to be able to teach it. I want to be able to continue to grow. If anybody had told me that in March of 2011, which was the month, obviously, that Janina transitioned, that I would be stating to God, look, I'm not ready for you yet. I don't want to die. If I had even told you I would even get to that point, I would have looked at you like you had two heads if you told me that in early grief. Early in my grief, I would have welcomed an early death. But again, now I want to use my newfound relationship with Janine and what I've learned from Patty and my other spiritual teachers to be as much service to others for as long as God's going to permit it. Plus, my relationship with Janine has also gotten me closer to my wife and her two surviving brothers. And I don't want to go that either. I was starting to re-engage with them, and that was part of what occurred in Long Island. Is that the message I got was, look, you're doing a great job honoring me. You're doing a great job honoring your daughter, but you have other parts of your life and other categories of your life that you have to honor as well too. The message being, that my daughter is always going to be there guiding me. I can connect with her at any time, but now I have to embark on a full and authentic life that embraces every category of my life. Since that time, since that day in 2011, I continue to express my will to the universe about my desire to grow, teach, and learn. One of the things that Patty impressed on me um, was the importance of the teachings of Crow, who, among other things, encourages us to honor the path as our teacher. And in fact, this is probably one of the uh, primary teachings that I quote from Crow wisdom and Crow animal medicine um, to anybody who will listen. And this is from a book by Jamie Sams and David Carson called Medicine Cards. And it's an outstanding book which really aggregates the teachings of animals from many Native American tribes and puts them in one book. It has cards that go along with it. I've taught individuals basically to use their intuition to pick the card that speaks to them the most, take a look at the teaching and see where it fits in their current life past. But Crow Wisdom says, honor the past as your teacher, honor the present as your creation, and honor the future as your inspiration. And if I had not embraced Crow teachings, if I had not committed to looking at everything that I stood for, that included looking at my past, I would not have been able to come to peace with the transition of my daughter, nor would I have been able to engage in ancestral healing with my mother and father. My mother, regarding her decision to be overly protective after me after my father left when I was 5 years old, and my father to understand that his act of abandonment was not an act of cowardness, was not a, but was an act of courage and an act of love. Because as I began to discover years later, um, in my late 50s and um, close to 60, that my father's his family had a history of they would leave if any situation, if emotional attachment or was asked for, if things got too heavy and too hot, um, they would book. His family's history was totally entwined in his DNA. He could not change his history. He wanted to, because my mother was a total antithesis of him. He wanted to, but he couldn't. And so therefore, he left. But I understood that. I got a different perspective on that. And though my father was in my life for 5 years, only 5 years, I loved him now as much as the mother who raised me. And this is all because of Crow medicine. Um, and Patty's urging me to incorporate that. And this was also another piece that I learned on my road to self-discovery, that it's never too late to heal old wounds. And you're never too old to look at your past. And I encourage individuals not to deny the teachings of their past. I know it's important to live in the present moment, to cultivate mindfulness, to help us get through some of the stresses of day-to-day life. But if we deny our past, we deny a good portion of our existence. In our past, every decision that we have made in our past, and this is on the road of self-discovery, for me, contributed to the path I'm embarking on in the present. Past and present are intertwined, and together they can ensure the future of our hopes and our dreams. I've also learned that because of the circularity of grief, we can return to the raw pain of grief at any time. Um, at any time. But even in our darkest moments, teachings that can enhance our ability to work through our grief will manifest. For example, I've learned that our greatest moments of sadness can help us turn into the most compassionate people towards others experiencing challenges. Isolation can lead to deep introspection and awareness. Anger, as long as it isn't self-destructive, can give us the energy to establish boundaries with individuals and other aspects of our life which we desire not to be a part of our experience. Embracing darkness as a teacher enables us to be authentic and whole. So with that, as a teacher, I'm going to end with some teaching points. And if my students were in class, they would probably be chuckling because I know I do a lot of these. So you're going to bear with me. I'm going to get into teacher mode here for a minute. Okay. These are other takeaways from the road to self-discovery. One is I had to wallow in the muck of my grief before I could wallow through it. There's no getting around it. You can try to suppress your pain. You can try to suppress all the negative emotions, but it's just going to come. It's going to be like if you take a beach ball and you try to suppress it in a barrel of water, you can suppress it for so much. Then when you think you've suppressed it enough and you let up on it, that beach ball continues to come up. You can suppress it again. You can have friends who would love to see you get over your grief, or family who would love to see you not grieve for longer than society deems necessary. Help you suppress that ball. But eventually, once the pressure is let up on that ball, the ball is going to surface. And if that ball is significant of your anger, of your sadness, of your grief, the message is that, look, I'm not going away. You might as well let me be a teacher to you. So I had to honor the pain, sadness, and anger that I experienced after Janine's death. Honoring these emotions was a catalyst for transforming my perspective on life and death. Every emotion that we experience, both positive and negative, is a crucial piece in the mosaic that comprises the path that we walk after the death of our loved ones. We can learn from everything. I don't believe that happiness is, as society would like us to think, by itself leads to fulfillment. I've talked to people who tell me there's one guy in particular, I ask, how you doing? Great. Never day's ever been better. And I'm thinking to myself, I don't think it's possible for anybody to be happy 24/7. And I think once we recognize that there are going to be many moments of happiness, but that what helps us to become authentic and whole is embracing every emotion and looking at even the negative emotions as being teachers to us and having some hidden gifts. Being able to embrace the total spectrum of emotions is going to allow us to embrace authenticity and genuineness. Progress made is never progress lost. Sometimes the emotional roller coaster of our grief makes us lose sight of the progress that we've made. However, I tell people, if you took 2 steps forward and 1 step backward, you're still 1 step ahead. You still made progress. Transformation of loss starts with simple intent. What I forgot to mention early, and I want to mention it here, is that after the Beyond Words conference ended, the conference was September 17, 2010. That next day, I took 3 of our presenters, very aware, very spiritually minded presenters, up to a place called Old Forge, which is in the Adirondacks. In September, if you've ever been up in the Adirondacks or upstate New York or Vermont or Maine, the colors, the changing colors of the leaves and trees are just beautiful. So I wanted them to get a little bit of that fall magic in upstate New York. And they were having this intense spiritual conversation about spirituality in the back. And all of a sudden, I looked up to this guy and said, I want to be where they are. And at the time, 3 to 7 years this was 7 years after my grief, that first statement I made to re-engage in life, I was starting to companion parents who had experienced the death of a child. I started to read a lot of books on grief. I started to write about my grief. I started to do presentations. I was doing everything that parents who were farther along in the journey modeled to me. And at that point, I thought I was working, and I thought I was doing a pretty effective job. But the fact that I spontaneously stated that intent to the universe, that I wanted something more, told me that my soul was crying out for something more. And sometimes our soul knows what we need long before our minds and bodies do. And that simple intent led to that experience I had with Patty, with Patty Farino. And the experience that I had exceeded what I had asked for. All I wanted was to be able to become more knowledgeable in spiritually based concepts and use that as a tool in my ongoing process of self-discovery to continue to help me work through my grief. But what I got was not just spiritual knowledge. I got a whole different perspective. Surrendering to the need not to know. For a long period of time after Janine's transition, I asked a lot of what if and what, well, why questions. I never got an answer or satisfied me that, or changed the fact that my daughter transitioned. Now, once I stopped asking the questions and embraced the quiet, I got the clarity that I needed. And I believe that there is movement and stillness. Activities that forge continuing bonds with our loved ones. And I talked about this in our Pieces of Me workshop, are powerful tools to help us develop new relationships with loved ones. It gives them and us permission to grow. We don't have to wait for signs from our loved ones to sense their presence. We can connect with their essence at any time. And there is nothing pathological about that. Research that has been done on the effect of continued bonds in helping individuals work through grief has been proven to be valid. It has proven to be helpful, and we get through grief through remembering, through hanging on to the memories of our loved ones, as opposed to forgetting. The importance of walking in awareness of the signs from our loved ones that communicate their eternal presence, and more importantly, that we do survive death. The signs we receive are always a product of what we are experiencing in the present. And I think this is one of the signs that I got from my daughter. It was the week of her 10th anniversary date. This was February 25th, 2013. And this is a sign. It was on the kitchen floor of my house. And there's a sign. I call it Janine's heart. And I marked the date. It was a Monday. It was February 25th. And immediately I did the numerology. I added the digits of 225, and I got 9. And 9 in some annals of numerology means healing and understanding or endings. And in March 1st, 2013 would have been the 10th year anniversary date. And 10 or 1 or 10 marks beginnings. And I told my wife, Sherry, I said, you got to keep this heart until Patty gets her. Patty wanted to make a trip from Long Island to be with us during that significant milestone date. And I said, you got to keep the heart there until, one, I take a picture of it, and 2, until Patty leaves. And I that was the only request I ever asked her in terms of, in terms of delaying cleaning anything. And I just said, just leave that there because I want Patty to see it. Okay. Probably, however, the most important teaching I've discovered since the death of my daughter is the need to be gentle with ourselves. The journey after the death of a child or any of our loved ones is a marathon. It's not a sprint. In the process, we must honor the yin and yang of who we are, because to deny that is to deny our authentic selves. We must embrace what we so often run away from, and that's ourselves. By embracing who we are, we can embark on the road of self-discovery and in the process become co-creators of our own reality with the universe. And with that, I want to leave my contact information up. There's my personal website, my email, my phone number. If I'm on social media. My son calls me the world's oldest millennial, so you can find me on Facebook, you can find me on Twitter, you can find me on LinkedIn, you can find me on Instagram. And I'd be happy to connect with you through any one of those social media platforms in addition to email. If you would like more information about the book, I've included a hyperlink to the book on Amazon, or if you want a signed copy, you can contact me at bootsyandangel@gmail.com, and we can make arrangements for that. So, okay. So with that, and it appears that my presentation has come to an end at a great time because my granddaughter and my great-granddaughter have come to see us. So with that, I want to thank all of you. I don't see any comments. I'm going to check. I don't see any comments in the, oh yes, I do. Let's see. Thank you, Nathan, for your comments. And yes, everyone has something to teach someone, and the day that I stop learning from anybody is the day that I need to determine if I need to do something else with my life. And you're welcome, Joshua, Josh with that. And yeah, Anchor kept me from getting better as well too. Nancy, thanks for watching. Emily, thank you for your kind comments and for your with bonds and with your identification of continued bonds and the and how grief evolves. And yes, Nancy, true grief does change us. So, and yes, and thank you all for, um, and thank you all for your comments. Thank you all for your validation. Um, thanks for being here. Thanks for listening to my story. And I wish and my path on self discovery. And I hope this resonated with you all. And thank you again. I wish you all peace. Bye.